What's up, guys? MC Stu here, and today we're going to take a look at the Paladin Temporal Battle Cruiser. This is the ship that was given away by Alienware starting last week. I believe they do still have some keys left. If you're interested in that, check out last week's video. But since quite a few of us got this ship, I figured we'd go ahead and take a look at a potentially good build for it. I did try out quite a few different builds and settled on the one that I'm going to show, as I was able to get the most damage and survivability out of it. So before we jump into that though, as always, I want to thank everybody that subscribes to the channel, watches the videos, is a part of the community. You guys are excellent. And also this week, I want to highlight another STO content creator. And this week, that is going to be CasualSAB. So I get them mixed up because I call him Spencer, but CasualSAB has been making STO content for looks like a little bit over 7 years. He's the current admin for the STO combat meter. That's the DPS table charts basically that many in the game strive to get higher and higher up on the list. It's quite a bit of fun doing that at the end game. If that's something you're interested in, I would definitely check out downloading that software. I do have a video which I'll link in the description on how to get that. It's also a great program just for checking how you're doing, but he currently manages that. His videos are really good and detailed for the nuanced things in the game. His latest one, effective ways to manually fire torpedoes. I've watched it. It's very, very good. And he goes into really good detail on a lot of these nuanced things that really, make that difference when you're really trying to perfect a build. So I definitely go over, check him out, give him a subscribe. He also streams on Twitch, and I will also link that down in the description for you guys as well. So next time you're live, or he is live, you can check him out, go in, give him a follow so you'll get that notification. I'd appreciate it, and I'm certainly sure he will as well. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the ship. I think this is a really cool looking ship personally. The ship's been out for a while. It was actually part of a bundle, which was the first one I had ever purchased in the game. So this is my paid account I did this on, and I already had this ship, so I didn't redeem a code for this, but I did on my free-to-play. It's the exact same tier 6 ship. I used the tier 6 version of it, not the tier 6 fleet version, just because I wanted to put something together that, especially if you're a newer player or a mid-tier player, you may not have access to fleet modules. If you do, then you'll be able to fill in the gaps here. You'll have an extra, I believe it's an engineering slot on the fleet variant. This build is not going to be a beginner's build, so this is going to basically be a mid-tier, something you could take into an elite or easily be able to play through advanced content with. I made it a point for the most part to stay with gear that has already been covered in the guides that I have, going through the beginner's guide and some of the intermediate and advanced builds. So most of the stuff that is on this ship, if you've watched any of the videos, you're going to be familiar with it, and there are videos that I have that go into each of these items in detail, or at least are explained multiple times through some of these other build videos. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Let's get this out of the way. All right, so what we went with, or what I went with, is a cannon scatter volley build. I initially went to beam overload. That's my go-to, especially for these kind of guide videos. And I've had some questions lately about, beam overload, cannon scatter volley, rapid fire, those kinds of things. And right now, in the state of the game, and some of this is going to depend on your resources, but Torp builds are OP. They're number one. And I'm going to leave science aside. They can also be, that high up there, but it takes a very specific build for those kinds of things. So leaving science aside, right now you're looking at Torps, cannon scatter volley, beam overload, and then fire at will. Fire at will, in most cases, not being a really much of a DPS kind of a build strategy, but more something that's going to lend itself to tanking. The reason I generally go with the beam overload is, especially for newer players or players with not a lot of resources, it's very easy to put together effective builds using beam overload. But I've covered that extensively, and on this particular ship, I found that scatter volley just did much, much better. And so that's the direction I went. So let's go ahead and jump into it and take a look at the gear here. So I'm just going to go through, name off what it is and why I'm using it and where it comes from. So to start with, we have the Terran Task Force, dual heavy cannon. This comes from the Terran Rep. This is by far probably the best cannon you can put on a ship. There's a phaser version, and there's also beam versions of this. So if you're doing a beam or you're doing cannon, you're definitely going to want, if you're in the disruptor or phaser. And I said phaser. This is phaser. There's a disruptor version of it. Let me clarify that. And that's on both of the types, beam and cannon. Next, I used a emitter-linked phaser dual heavy. Emitter link doesn't really make any difference on this build. You could go with just a crafted dual heavy cannon and be just fine, no problem at all. Having this particular weapon doesn't have any procs. It has basically some passives that are giving us some extra shield restoration and shield capacity. You know how I feel about that, so shields aren't worth much in the state of the game currently. So just know, if you don't have a linked phaser, dual heavy, that's not going to make or break your build. A crafted one would work perfectly fine. Next, we have the prolonged engagement phaser. This is something that you can get out of the Phoenix packs. Pretty inexpensive. It's just one of the very rare tokens, and if you get, pick up a 10 pack of those for 40,000 dilithium, you'll most likely get one. I find those drop pretty often. Compared to the epic and the ultra rares, you'll get plenty of very rare tokens and can pick up this cannon. The main reason this is here is for the amplification relays. It basically is going to gain fire cycling haste, and it's going to stack up and give you up to 20% firing cycle haste. Excellent weapon and very easy to obtain. Next, we have the phaser quad cannons. This is the weapon that's modeled after what we saw on the Defiant in Deep Space Nine. I've covered this fairly extensively as well. You can get this for dilithium for the... And forgive me, I don't have my notes up. It is basically the Defiant variant. I believe it's the Tier 4 version of it, but you can get it from the ship vendor. If you just peruse through that in Tier 4, I believe it is, look for the Defiant, and this is going to come on it. It runs somewhere around 70 to 75,000 dilithium, the ship does, and this comes equipped to it, and you can pull it off. It's got really cool visuals, and it's an excellent weapon. We're using pretty much the standard space set here. I found in this ship... It gets beat up fairly easy, and I remember feeling the same way when I originally bought it years back. So I guess let me just go through it here. So I'm using the Elite Fleet Intervention Protomatter Deflector. This is here for the critical chance, critical severity. We're using the competitive engine. This is the tactical version, so we get the speed boost when we're activating tactical abilities. This comes from the competitive rep. The deflector comes from the colony, fleet colony. And then I'm using the two-piece discovery set with the warp core and the Tilly shield. I pretty much use the Tilly shield on everything for the extra damage. And I had a question too about, I run my shield levels very low, basically as low as I can get them. And the question's been asked quite a bit, am I losing out on this proc that you get? Because your weapons gain or cause additional damage to the enemy shields. With them at almost 0 or as close to I can get, I'm still getting 11.5%. If I crank that all the way up, it's really not that much more that I'm getting out of it. So if I crank it all the way up, where are we at here? We're at 20%. So, it's a significant increase, I guess. We're not significant, but we're, 9 points or so. But it's not enough for me to give up on my mobility. And that's why I run it. And basically I'm getting a free extra 11.5% of damage to my enemy target. So That's the reason I do it. Could you get more out of it by cranking that up? Yes, but you're going to lose a lot of mobility and you're not going to get to where you need to be as quickly as possible, which means you're not going to have as much time to put damage out, especially in TFOs. So that's why I run that the way that I do. I'm running this two-piece because of the survivability aspect. So the two-piece on here is giving us a very nice boost to the regen that we have. So if we look at the two-piece here, so we're getting 120% hull regeneration, which is a huge chunk there. And I've just found on this ship, the hit points stock aren't super high. The fleet version's a little bit better, but I just find having a little bit of extra survivability in here helps me. Now, if you're doing other things or have other parts that you're using instead of these that are giving you, say, more resistance or those kinds of things, then I most likely would use this core here, which is the Deuterium stabilized, and that would be for that negative 15% weapons power cost. So especially when you go into your firing modes, and I've talked about this core extensively, you're going to have a lot less power draw on your weapons power, keeping your damage rate up. So that would be the other option that I would use, either if you don't have this rep gear from the Discovery set or Reputation, or if you're have running some other traits or something that's going to give you more survivability, this probably would be my first choice here. Or you could even use one of the Spire fleet cores like this particular one here. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the rear weapons. All right, so we are using the Advanced Inhibiting Phaser Heavy Turret, and I'm running this in the two-piece set with the console. This comes from the Gamma Rep. The console is giving us additional phaser damage. Most of the other procs on here are aimed towards projectiles, mines, and recharge speed for mines. It will also boost Polaron. This module is here for that phaser boost, and the two-piece that we get from that is giving us another additional phaser boost. So at 10% there, this is Cat 1, and then you're getting the passive 26.3. So 36, it's almost like having another fleet console, tactical console here on the bottom. So I'm running the two-piece on that because that's a nice boost, and passively it's complementing the build as well. Next, we are running the heavy biomodulating phaser turret. This is from the, I believe it's the Undine rep, and I don't think it's actually called that. Let's just look so we can make sure. Counter Command. So this comes from the Counter Command rep, and you can get this phaser from here. It's a heavy hitting phaser. You could use in the back here, like in place of this. I'm not running this with any kind of set. I'm running it because at tier 6 in the rep, you get that plus 2% bonus damage you see here at the top of the tooltip. If you don't have access to this, just run a crafted one, or any other one that you do have access to will be fine. The last two items here are kind of the same thing, but a different flavor. So they're the Trilithium Enhanced Phaser Turret and Omni. These come from the mission... I run it so much it should just roll off my tongue, but we'll just look at where it's at. Beyond the Nexus is what it's called, and it comes from the New Frontiers arc. So it's going to be this one here with Geordi on the front. And out of this, you get a... you can pick either of those and the console, so we'll use combinations of these. The two-piece from it is nice. Using these two together does not count for the two-piece. So there's a total of a three-piece, which includes the torpedo, but these are interchangeable in the set. So by running both of those, I am not getting a two-piece. The reason I'm running both of these, though, is both of them have a proc for fire cycling haste. So by running both of those, I'm having 2 times that chance to build up that additional fire cycling haste on this particular build here. These are mission drops. You can just go run the mission twice and grab these. It's actually a really quick and easy to run mission. So, I mean, it literally takes me 5 or 6 minutes to run through it. So these pieces you can get pretty easy. It's not as bad as getting like stuff from like the Iconian arc where the missions can be fairly long and it gets a little tedious, especially if you're getting like the space set out of the last mission out of it and you need to run it 3 times. I generally break that up into a couple days. So those are the weapons in the space set. For the consumable devices here, we are running the Deuterium Surplus. This is for the extra speed boost. We are running energy amplifiers, and this is giving us a big boost to our energy weapon power and damage. And then lastly, we were using the subspace field modulator, and this is for the extra damage resistance. Our next 3 items here, and I have a video specifically on these 3 items. These are the 3 Lobby items that I recommend for everybody to get. Doesn't matter what kind of build you're doing for the most part, until you get into just the extreme tip top of in-game min-maxing. Depending on your build, there are things that will outclass this, but for everything underneath these, or underneath a build like that, you're going to use all 3 of these items. And this is the Binaural infused circuitry. And that is there for the massive critical severity boost that we get. We're using the Swarm processor, and this is for the very large critical chance that we get, as well as accuracy. And then we have the tachyokinetic converter, and this is here for the critical chance and critical severity. It gives us some control, which on this build doesn't really matter. And then lastly, it gives us a huge boost to the flight turn rate, which is very nice, especially on a build like this, because it's a forward-facing build for the most part. That's where the majority of your damage is coming out of the front of this, and it's going to need to be in that forward 90-degree arc. All right, we already talked about the gamma piece here in conjunction with the turret in the back. So let's jump down and take a look at the M6 computer. So this is, I made a video about this, talking about this as the poor man, or the, substitute you could use from the DPRM. I think more accurately, it's really the poor man's version of the Domino. So it doesn't have a passive, but the clicky on it is very nice. So you get the 15% bonus all damage for 15 seconds. It's going to give you a 25% cooldown reduction for tactical abilities, and a plus 20% fire cycling haste for 15 seconds. It's going to give us accuracy and defense. And in this particular build, we have it put together in a way with some personal space traits where we're able to get this up, in some cases, much faster than 2 minutes, depending on, the ISE or ISA that I tested it in. Some instances, I'll wait till the end, but if I really want to push it, you can get, 2 uses out of this. If you're going to run this in an ISE with a team, you can definitely get more than 1 use out of this much prior to the 2-minute cooldown mark, which we'll talk about when we get to the personal space traits. This comes off of the Temporal Escort. It's another ship. I believe it's tier 3, I want to say. Tier 3 or 4, I get these mixed up. But similar to the Defiant with the quad cannons, you can get this from dilithium off that ship, pull it off, and use it for yourself. Pretty easy to earn this in game and get it, especially if you don't have a DPRM. If you had a DPRM or if you had Domino, you would be using that in place of this. So if you have either one of those consoles, replace this with one of those. Lastly, in our science slot, we have the assimilated module. This is here for the critical chance and critical severity. Also for the +5 weapons power. The drain and control on this build are pretty inconsequential. And same kind of lineup in our tactical. We're using the Lorca's custom fire control. This is here for the nice boost to critical severity. We're also getting a very nice boost to our weapons power, and we're getting a huge boost to Starship shield penetration. This comes from the Discovery rep, and this actually looks different than when I ran the ISA. I believe on the ISA, I didn't have this. I had it like this, and I think I just didn't save it. Yeah, so forget using both of those. If you want to run the torpedo up front, then use the Omni in the back. But this 2-piece is a must. I love this torpedo. It's very, very good. But with only having 4 slots up front, I found having a 4th cannon instead of this in the front really made a big difference on this particular ship and build. And the reason why this is in the back instead of, say, that Omni is the 2-piece. It's worth taking up a weapon slot, even if it's barely going to fire at all in your run. And the reason for that is for every critical hit you get, you're going to get a stacking critical severity all the way up to 25%. That lasts for 20 seconds, but that 20 seconds renews every time you get a critical hit. So if you have, say, a 30% plus critical chance rate, this is going to build up very quick, and it's going to basically stay at that max 25 for the duration of combat until you're not landing any more critical hits. So that should have been there. I think my loadout got messed up when I started moving around. Who knew that your loadout could get messed up in STO today? Make sure you're checking that before you're going in. I did a lot of runs testing this ship out. Some of them got screwed up because of the way the run went. Some of them got screwed up because traits run slotted and things like that. So make sure you're checking your loadouts before you go and do stuff. You can find yourself being a little bit bummed out. So, but that's why I am running this in the back as opposed to something else. Let's say, I don't know, you didn't have a crafted phaser yet. I would definitely, if I was going to run this up front, I would drop this dual heavy crafted, or mine is the linked, and I would use the prolonged, the quad cannon, and definitely the Terran Task Force with the torpedo up front. But in the testing that I did, it did better. Having this dual heavy cannon did better, more damage than having the torpedo up front, and I'm still able, by putting it in the back, to get that huge stacking critical severity. For the last 3 consoles, these are all going to be vulnerability locators, phaser. So these are giving us critical chance and big boost to our phaser damage. These come from the Fleet Spire. Let's take a quick look at skills. For specialization, I'm running strategist and intel as the primary. Space traits have not, or skills have not changed really in any kind of way here. I don't think this differs. This differs a little bit from my free-to-play because I also have this built where I can run EPG science, not really control, but EPG. So there's some minor differences, but for the tactical sides of things, it's pretty much the same. So that's what I'm running there. All right, let's take a look at our traits. Now, this is where this build can get a little bit more expensive, and I'll kind of go through this, and if you don't have certain things, it's not going to change the way your build is, okay? It's not going to perform as good, but at the end of the day, getting gear, for the most part, is pretty straightforward and easy. You can grind it out, you can buy it, you can get... most of it is rep gear, right? Everything on that ship is rep gear. It didn't cost any kind of real money for any of the gear that I just went over. So you can get all that stuff, but really what starts to make or break builds or bring them to the next level is going to be your personal space traits and your starship traits. So the starship traits should look familiar. These are the same ones from the my top 4 C-Store ships, right? So this is all the same stuff that I've recommended using, with the last one here being from the specialization unlock. So this is all pretty much the standard stuff. But let's go ahead and take a look at the personal space traits, okay? So Good Day to Die is probably going to be my first one if I'm grinding out credits and I'm trying to get, any tactical build built up. So Go Down, or Good Day to Die, allows for Go Down fighting to be clickable anytime, essentially. So generally, without that trait, you have to be at 50% or lower hull health before you can do this, and it gives you additional damage resistance, and then it gives you a massive 50% bonus damage boost, which is huge. By having this slotted, you can click this at any time and use it. So you still have your cooldown like you normally would, but you don't have to be, almost dead or starting to die before you can use it. So instead of it becoming an oh crap button, it becomes something that is more, of an offensive damage dealing button that you can click. This is probably going to be the number one thing if I'm starting a brand new account that I'm going to go after, because it's an all damage boost. You can use it on any kind of build that you're doing on a tactical officer. This is only available on a tactical officer because it affects a tactical officer's innate ability. So an engineer doesn't have this this clickable ability, neither does a science officer. We're going to come back to this because this has a little bit more involved there. So let's just look at the rest. So we're using Fleet Coordinator. This is a stock item. It's giving you +2 bonus damage for yourself and every teammate. So if you're running a standard TFO, with 5 of you in there total, that's 10% bonus damage, Cat 2. Next, we are using Modulating Fire. This is also a lockbox one that you'd have to buy off the exchange, or if you do open boxes, you potentially could get this out of one of the selection boxes. And what this is doing is giving us additional shield penetration. If you drop this, it would be a minor difference on your overall performance. But this does make somewhat of a difference. It only triggers every 45 seconds. So in a standard ISA run, they're 2 to 3 minutes maximum. So this might trigger 3 times for 10 seconds. So this is not a make or break. All right, next we have Innocuous. This is another stock trait. This is giving us +5 5% critical severity, and it's also giving us a threat reduction of 25, which is extremely helpful. Next, we are using cannon training. This is also a stock option, and this is giving us the plus 5% bonus cannon damage. This would probably be second or third on my list for paid traits off of the exchange or lockboxes is Terran targeting. This is giving us just a straight up plus 15% critical severity. It is excellent. That's a huge boost to just take up one of these slots here. Intel Attaché. This is probably a must for everybody. This is something that everybody wants to work towards getting. What it does is on a critical hit, it's going to reduce by 2% the cooldown on any of your captain's abilities, okay? So for instance, if I am clicking this, which we just talked about, go down fighting, and it's giving me a 43-second cooldown, I'm in the middle of combat, I'm getting critical hits. For every critical hit I get, it's dropping 2% of whatever time's left, 2% of whatever time's left. And so what happens is this ability is going to be up and running much more often. So you're going to get it, 3 to 4 to 5 times in a 2-minute, long combat session, which is huge, where generally you would only get this 2 times with just its stock base cooldown. And so when you're building, even if you're on an engineer or science, if you're building around some of those innate captain's abilities, this is huge. For tactical officers, it's massive because a lot of their innate abilities like attack pattern alpha, this is a huge damage boost that you get. It also, or this has a 2-minute cooldown. With being in combat and having a decent critical chance rate, this is going to come up in half the time or less. So you're going to get a lot more use out of this, where these options used to be more of a kind of one-time go alpha strike, I'm saving it. With this being on here, I now have it on the spam bar. That's how often that's going to come up, and it's not going to take anywhere as long as 2 minutes. So for any kind of captain, Intelligence Agent Attaché is definitely a must-have. All of these, depending on when you go to buy, are going to run you around 20 million on the exchange. I know it sounds like a lot, but I'm trying to get CasualSAB actually to do some videos on how to make EC in the game. He really understands that more than than most do. And when you start getting some of the basics, I know it sounds like a lot, but it's not. There's people that don't spend any real-life money on the game and have literally 1 billion credits, and they don't spend any real money, and they're not spending their whole life on the game either. There are ways to do it. I don't know all the ins and outs on that. I'll pressure him more. Maybe if we can get him enough additional subs and follows, that'll be enough for us to convince him. But so I know these sound like a lot, and to a new player, it is a lot. But once you get a handle on the game, these are things that you're not going to need up front either, right? So this build is a mid-tier intermediate build for advanced content and entering elite content. All right, next we have another lockbox exchange. This one tends to be a little bit cheaper. It's repair crews. Like I said, I was having a lot of issues with dying. Some of it might have been I was using Anchored. Anchored is a trait that when you're still, every couple seconds it gives you a stacking 5% bonus damage, which is huge, but at the same time it gives you a reduction in your resistance. And so once it's fully buffed up, it's negative 20%. And so I probably could have just dropped that and used something else that was damage related but not hurting my survivability and been okay, but I was dying so much that I decided I'm just going to put in repair crew. I ran runs all day yesterday and then quite a few today in order to get a decent video and get this dialed in properly. So once I went here, it was fine. I was happy with the run, and at that point, I was like, we're just going to leave it like that. We could probably squeeze more out of it by dropping that and using something else that's damage dealing. You could use operative or a couple of the other ones. Maybe we do have a torpedo on it. So even though it's in the back, you could use torpedo training. There's a number of other options that you could use here. All right, and then lastly on the list, then we'll go back up to Unconventional Systems. This is something we should probably talk about independent and a specific video on it. It wouldn't be a long one, but is the Boimler Effect. This came or just was added to the Lobby store. It's 200 Lobby, which is not cheap. It's about as much as the consoles that we have on the ship each. But this is huge. This is essentially replacing your need for Aux to Bat or Photonic Officer or Improved Photonic Officer when you're not using that. Maybe with Improved Photonic Officer also gives you some boost to your exotic damage. So, but in any case, you can run this without running Photonic Officer or Aux to Bat. So I've started to change out quite a my builds with it. The reason for that is what it does is every time you activate a Bridge Officer ability, it's going to reduce all other Bridge Officer abilities. It has a chance of 17.5% to reduce all other Bridge Officer abilities by their global cooldown. And so what your global cooldown is essentially the fastest something can recharge. So let's just say we are running Beam Overload 1 and Beam Overload 2. If I clicked on Beam Overload 1, Beam Overload 2 is automatically going to go on cooldown because you can't click them both at once. And so what that's going to do is put it on its global cooldown, which is 15 or 50% of it. That's actually the most you can cool down any ability in the game that has the ability to be cooled down. So, Cannon Scatter Volley runs for 10 seconds, and there's nothing you can do to make it go faster for recharge time for that ability than 15 because the stock cooldown is 20. The workaround for that is using traits like the one that we have on this, Withering Barrage, that actually extends the time of Cannon Scatter Volley by 4 or 5 seconds. So basically it brings the duration of the ability up to the minimum cooldown time you can get. And so anytime that you're clicking any Bridge Officer ability, all other Bridge Officer abilities are going to have a 17.5% chance to go to its global cooldown, which is huge. That is basically best case scenario with any of the other methods is to try and get those abilities as close to global cooldown. This just does it with that 17.5% chance. And if you look at my spam bar, I'm hitting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 just on my spam bar, not to mention any of the other Bridge Officer abilities I'm clicking. So with the amount of Bridge Officer abilities that you're using, this is going to work constantly to keep everything cooled down all the time. So this is really changing. It's been a little bit hard, especially on like my tank build or my Aux to Bat builds where I'm like, okay, well, what other duty officers am I going to use? Because you got to use 3 duty officers for that. And so we're really kind of rethinking the way that some of these things are put together. If you don't have this, use Photonic Officer. If you don't, if you have the Aux to Bat duty officers, the technicians use Aux to Bat. Those are still viable methods of getting the cooldowns. They work great. And but if you do have this, or you have access to this, or you're about to finish the events, and you've decided you're going to get Lobby to get maybe the consoles and a ship, definitely consider getting this. This is huge. Having your Bridge Officer abilities available to you more often, or as often as actually possible in the game, is more valuable than any piece of gear you could put on the ship. Your Bridge Officer abilities are extremely powerful. That's why they have the cooldowns and all the different things that they have. Okay, let's also then talk about Unconventional Systems. This has been in the game for a while. Most are probably familiar with this. And what it does is using any kind of control Bridge Officer abilities gives a negative 7% recharge time reduction for any of your universal consoles. So this ship doesn't use a lot of universal clicky consoles. It's mainly just that M6 computer. And so if you're running a build that maybe you're running this and you're also running, let's say you have the DPRM and you're running both, that's going to affect both of those and you're going to get even more out of it. So on this build, this is here basically so I can cool down the M6 computer and use it maybe 2 times in an ISA or much, much more in some other TFO where I am being able to use control abilities. So let's take a look at the control abilities that we're using, and then we'll come back over and look at just the rest of the stuff down here on the bottom. So what I'm using is scrambled sensors. We're using tractor beam. We are using unstable warp bubble. Sorry guys, it's getting late here. And then I am also using jam sensors. All of these have a control-like effect to them, as well as the Heisenberg amplifier. So all of these are giving me an ability or the ability to get that 7% knocked off. So if you time these things out, some of these I left in the spam bar because they recharge very fast, like jam sensors or tractor beam, because this helps reduce everything with the Boimler's effect. And then I have my other 3 here. And so once I click this and it stops running, so because this runs for 15 seconds, once it stops and that buff is gone, so we got 10 seconds listed down here, then as I get near targets, I'll click 1. Once I get near some more targets, I'll click the next. And if you're able to time this out and click these to where you're affecting, you have to affect targets with them. You can't just click them. So they have to actually have an effect on targets. Then you're going to cool this down much, much quicker than otherwise you would without that unconventional systems on there. Now, if you don't have unconventional systems, personal space trait, you're only going to be able to probably use this once. That's not going to break the build. All of these things that I'm talking about, that like if you don't have it, it's okay. If you don't have it, it's okay, right? You're hearing a lot of that. And that's because a lot of these builds, every little bit adds up to a lot at the end. But if you're missing half or some, it's not. If you're missing all of them, it's definitely going to have an effect on the build. You are not going to get the same kind of damage out of this build. It's still going to perform very well. And if you don't have any of that stuff, you're probably a newer player anyways, or just haven't put a lot of time in, or just not interested in doing that. And that's okay. The ship is still going to do very, very well, even without this stuff. You have the gear. If you have any of these traits and these kinds of things, it's going to do well. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you want to do good amounts of damage in the game, you got to have good gear. And, that's not going to happen overnight, right? And so, like I said, this particular video is really for more of your intermediate to advanced players or new players, or I don't want to say new, okay? New means you just started the game, but, newer players, been playing a year or so, starting to build up, to give you a template for things to kind of build towards. And like I said, I used mostly all items that are things that, if you've been going through the beginner's guide, these are all things that I've suggested already and, will culminate in this build or many of the other builds that I put out. So I try not to put out videos for beginners like, hey, get this stuff, and then when we do higher end builds, none of that stuff's there, right? And so I want all of my videos to, synergize from the beginning stuff of what you should be working towards to it coming together in in-game builds for you. Okay, let's quickly just take a look at the Starship Traits here. We have emergency weapons cycle. This is a must-have. This should be probably your first purchase if you're going to buy a ship, or if you're going to get the coupons. If you don't have any tier 6 ships except for this one, then definitely I would get the Arbiter Battle Cruiser, get this trait. The ship is excellent. The trait is a must-have. This is huge. I get questions a lot. In fact, I was responding to somebody today. They're having a lot of problems with, their weapons power starts to go down in the middle of beam overload and things like that. There's consoles that'll boost your weapons power and reduce the cost a little bit, but nothing is going to do it like this does. So anytime you activate emergency power to weapons, you're going to get a 50% weapons power cost, which is huge, and you're also going to get a 20% fire cycling haste, which is also huge, for 30 seconds. And if you click on emergency power to weapons, 45 seconds. But if you have the Boimler effect, or you're using Photonic Officer or anything else, this is going to cool down much, much faster than that amount of time, and you're going to have it up pretty much full time. Okay, so this is definitely a must-have. We have Withering Barrage. This comes off of a number of different ships now. If you did get a Klingon recruit, this is the trait that comes on the recruit that they give you on the KDF recruit. That event ran a few months back. This whole year's is flying by, so 3 or 4 months back. And you can pull this off of that ship to get it. There's a number of C-Store ships that you can get this off of. We have Strike from Shadows. Withering Barrage, what it does, skip ahead here, this extends Cannon Scatter Volley by 4%. So when we activate Cannon Scatter Volley, we're getting 14 seconds with the global minimum cooldown of 15. So basically when we're running this, we are only having 1 second every 14 seconds that Cannon Scatter Volley is not firing. Strike from Shadows, this is here for the damage boost, the crit chance, and the huge 60% crit threat, it rhymes, reduction. We have Promise of Veracity, and this is here for the plus 4% bonus damage, and this is going to happen as soon as you go into combat and you use a pilot or a tactical bridge officer ability, and this moved off it here, so it's maximum of it can only happen once every 4 seconds, and it's maximum of 5 stacks. So this turns into 25%, 20%, 20% bonus damage, which is very, very nice. And this stays through the duration of combat. And then lastly, we have, what do we got here? Unconventional tactics. This comes from completing the strategist. So once you fill all these in, that'll unlock that trait in your specialization there. And what this does is it's similar to what we have here with Good Day to Die, is it's going to turn your brace for impact into also a clickable damage boost. So 15% bonus damage, which is still a nice boost. And all players have this ability innate to the captain, so it's not specific for your particular class. Down for our reputation traits, it's basically the same lineup we're always using. We are using the advanced targeting for the critical severity. We are using precision for the critical chance. I am using torpedo pre-fire sequence for the boost to the torpedo, although on this build that's really not making a big difference because the torpedo's in the back and it's not barely firing at all. This is a huge one. I use this on pretty much everything. Tyler's Duality. This is giving critical chance based on the amount of hit points you have. And then we have Magnified Firepower, which is giving us a boost to weapons damage. All right. So let's look at the rest of the station. So we've already talked about all of the control things here. You will notice I'm still running Photonic Officer, and this is kind of part of the testing that I'm doing, but I have this here just to make sure my cooldowns are still looking good. On my free-to-play, where I was messing around with this build, I wasn't running it, and I was able to get Boimlers on that, and I wasn't noticing any kind of issue there. You could drop this if you have Boimlers. If you don't, this is going to be the cheapest, easiest one to use, Photonic Officer. I have a specific video just for Photonic Officer if you're interested in knowing how that works. Tactical, we have Spread. Again, kind of a waste at this point because the torpedo's in the back, but every now and then bad guys are behind you, so that might go off a bit, but this isn't really doing us much. We're using Attack Pattern Beta, and this is here for the damage debuff to the enemy. And then we're using Cannon Scatter Volley 2. So this ship will only fit Cannon Scatter Volley 2 in it. It'd be nice if it had 3, but that's not the type of ship that it is. So I did, like I said, experiment quite a bit with Beam Overload. Beam Overload is an excellent build type, and I focus a lot on that, especially in my my new player guides, because it's an easy build to put together. It's extremely effective, and it works good. And the builds that I put together with this worked good. And what you would basically do if you wanted this to be a Beam Overload build is you would literally just change this ability to Beam Overload, and you could either put beam arrays on all of it and beam boat it, or you could put dual beam banks all in the front, and then you could do the Trilithium Omni here, Crafted Omni here, and the Omega Borg Cutting Omni here, and leave everything else on this build exactly the same, and it would perform very well. But I did a lot of testing with both. At the end of the day, I was averaging about 30 to 40K difference. And the reason for that is while Beam Overload is extremely effective, in missions and in TFOs, you can do very well with it. You can survive, you can have a good time, you can do a good amount of damage. The bottom line is that Cannon Scatter Volley just puts more damage onto more targets. You're just going to get more out of that. But that's how you could easily just change this over. Everything else on the build would stay the same except for the ability and all the weapons. And now it's a Beam Overload build. Let's take a look at engineering, or the last tactical ability I have is the Chemocyte Lace Weaponry. This is a filler. It does okay damage. It's a lockbox item that you can get off the exchange. If you don't have this, again, not the end of the world. You could use Tactical Team or something like that. For engineering, we are using the emergency power to engines. This is for the duty officer that cools down evasive maneuvers. I have a whole video on that as well for movement and getting around the map quickly. But this procs a duty officer that allows evasive maneuvers to come off cooldown very quickly. You'll notice a theme on this, right? I mean, everything's about just making your abilities come up faster and faster. Bonus damage, critical severity, some resistance for your survivability. But again, if you get to the point where you're putting off enough damage, your survivability is a lot less because things are dying so fast. So cooldowns are huge for every bit of your build, and synergizing that into what you're doing, right? Then we have emergency power to weapons. So this is here for the big boost. We're getting to energy weapons damage. And this is also triggering the Starship trait, the weapon cycle. And then lastly, on the engineering slot, because this is a temporal ship, I'm using recursive shearing. And what recursive shearing does is when you put this on a target and you start attacking the target, what it does is it saves a portion of the damage you're putting into it and the rest of your team. And when it expires, it explodes and does a huge amount of damage. I was really surprised. I got a lot more out of this ability with Cannon Scatter Volley than I did with Beam Overload, which in the past was not the case. Beam Overload is just going to give you more in something like this, but you are using a lot more specific and expensive traits to put together a Beam Overload recursive shearing build, and that's probably why. But this actually performed much better under Cannon Scatter Volley. Science, we've already discussed this, so we have the jam jam target sensors, and again that's for the unconventional systems, just like the two up top, and then our photonic officer for additional cooldown, which again, if you have Boimlers, you can go ahead and drop that. All right, let's take a peek at our duty officers here, and then we'll take a quick look at the run. All right, space. Excuse me. Okay, first one, and again, going away from, on this character, Oxed Bat with Boimler, I found it a little bit harder to pick what I want in here, which is weird, because like on my free-to-play for, a year or so now, I've been using Photonic Officer, and there's not like there's any duty officers for that, but again, I didn't want to use any of the Borg duty officers or anything that was, super expensive. Some of that stuff, some of these duty officers can be 100 million, which is a lot. Some of them can be a lot more than that, which is just crazy. But in any case, let's take a look. So first one, we have a energy weapons officer, and what this is doing is giving me a chance. The first shot while beam overload is active is giving us 30%. So this is not doing anything for this build. This is left over from when I was running the beam overload test on it. So what I would probably run is, instead of this, is I would run the variant of this, and I only have green ones. No, I do have energy weapons. Yeah, so you can only run, well, you can run more than one of these types, but they don't stack, right? So I'm not sure what I would run here. I do have an extra slot unlocked, so many of you might, so this is probably a non-issue. But if you do, there's some duty officer abilities that will give you potential for faster recharge and beam overload. You'll have to weigh that, though. If you're running Boimler, it's probably a waste, right? So for me personally, and the way I've been playing the last few years, I'm kind of in a weird spot using Boimler. So fill this with whatever makes sense. If it's beam overload, obviously this makes sense, and so does the rest of it. For Cannon, though, it's just not having an effect on that, right? So this is very specific. There are Cannon versions of this, though, so you could go and look for that on the exchange under the emergency weapons officer. So moving along here, we have a Tholian, and I will not try and pronounce his name, but this is giving us an extra 10% all damage. And I thought this was just for Borg. It is. Okay, for Borg in space. So this isn't going to make any other difference if you're not fighting the Borg. That's mainly what I like to do. I do some of the story content, but at this point, playing through it so many times on so many different characters, I mostly tool around with different builds on the ship and, messing with different configurations. And that's generally my test map that I'm going to use is any of the Borg ones there. So that's why I'm slotting that. The next two are going to be basically the same thing, but different flavors. So we have a 2% chance to gain +1 critical chance. For 15 seconds, it stacks up to 3 times. And let's see, chance to gain buff on firing energy weapons. So anytime you fire an energy weapon, I don't know if that's a full cycle or each one. It says energy weapons. If you know, let me know in the description if that's per cycle or is that per individual weapon firing. The next one is basically the same thing, but it's giving us a 3% because it's blue, and it's giving us a 3% chance of giving us 10% of critical severity buff, 15 seconds, and again stacks up. Same activation, does that either per cycling of energy weapons or per. Again, let me know if you have the answer to that. Okay, next we have the Con Officer. This is from the Phoenix Prize Pack, and this is what I was referring to with our Bridge Officer ability of emergency powered engines. So anytime you run evasive maneuvers, it goes for the 8 seconds, it goes into cooldown. Once it goes into cooldown, having this duty officer will allow emergency power to engines to cool this down very rapidly. So we can demonstrate that. Clicked it, and we have 4 seconds left, and it is ready to use again. So if you were to use it again, though, right now, so I got 8 more seconds, you won't be able to cool it down again for another, 30 seconds or so until this ability is back up. And with any of your cooldowns, though, that's going to go much, much faster. So using, the Boimler or any of that other stuff, you'll be able to get that to cool down much, much quicker and be able to cool down this ability again. It's an excellent duty officer. It comes out of the Phoenix packs. It's easy to get. When I do any of my recruits with these events that have come out, as soon as duty officer opens, this is one of the first things I get, so I can get that ship around the map. It makes leveling and playing the missions a lot funner to me if I can move around a lot quicker. It also makes the mission go quicker too, which is good in a lot of cases. Lastly, I am using the Exocomp. This comes from an event that they run multiple times a year, and you get it at Starfleet Academy. And basically what it does is it is going to add additional effects to your batteries. So if we hover over my weapons bonus damage battery, so by itself this normally just gives 20% bonus damage energy weapons. With this, you're going to get all these additional ones. Increased damage for 10 seconds, so it increases the duration of it by 10%. And then this is, okay, it's kind of weird because in the tooltip, it's actually listing all the things it does. So shield batteries, red matter, auxiliary batteries, and auxiliary batteries again. Okay, no, that's just additional information. So it's kind of weird. Normally your tooltip is going to just give you information about what this particular thing does, but this tooltip lets you know, like if this was a shield battery, it lists the shield effect as well. So, but the only effect from this duty officer is going to be that top one, where we're getting that additional 10% of the damage increase. So a lot of this stuff I just kind of filled in, so these crit chance ones, they're very low in chance. So Con Officer's huge for me, especially if you're, competitively, running the ISAs, the ISE, and, whatever. I mean, getting around is huge. I mean, I like I said, I made a whole video on it because it matters that much. The rest of the stuff, fit in what you have, what's going to synergize with your builds. I don't have anything here that's super expensive. I mean, you can get most of the stuff off the exchange or a version of it very, very cheap. But like the rest of the build, there's not any 1, 2, or even 3 things that are just going to, destroy this build. If you're brand new and somehow, someone just gave you, all the gear that's on this ship and you knew how to fly, it performed pretty good, 40, 50K, which is pretty good. It's higher than most people. But, as soon as you start adding these traits in and some of these other things and synergizing all the effects and not chasing, particular abilities that just do one thing, right? So there's things that I click that, cool down multiple things, or they give me additional, damage for this particular build on top of cooling down things, right? So you don't want to go off in these wild kind of, goose chases where you're kind of after this one thing happening. You really want things to synergize together, have multiple, angles of effect where you have more of triangular connections between your abilities and what the ship is built to do than you have just kind of straight lines out to just one thing that this other, this ability does. So I don't want to go off on a tangent on that. Let's go ahead and take a look at the ISA run and see how this bad boy did. All right. Here is the parse result. So this was just a pug run, random. Like I said, I've been running them for quite a while. This was the first time I ran this exact configuration of the build. So I had a lot of bad luck yesterday with ISA runs where, you know, a couple teammates would go to the right and everyone goes to the left and the whole map would just be a disaster. And then I had some failures in the builds that I was working on that I had to work through. I got the beam overload, like I said, laid out pretty good. And then I decided to move over to cannon scatter volley, do something a little bit different. And I found that we were getting more out of it. So this run was a good run. Everybody on the team, for the most part, carried their weight, did a good job. Everyone went where they were supposed to. And this build performed very well, especially for cannon scatter volley 2. With, you know, it being really a mid-tier, you know, advanced entry-level elite kind of build. 218 is I'm very happy with that for this ship. There's no X upgrade on the ship. It's not the fleet version either. So if you went fleet module, got yourself the fleet version of it, did an X upgrade, you could do an even, you know, quite a bit more with this ship. And if you have some of the even higher end traits, you know, you could probably on a good run, good team, you know, scratch 300K in an advanced, on an elite, you know, you could definitely do quite a bit higher. So let's just take a quick look at the breakdown on just some of the weapons, just so you can kind of get an idea of kind of what did what here. So our Terran Task Force, dual heavy, did the best at 31K under Scatter Volley 2. That's really good. I mean, you figure that's as much as what the two teammates on the bottom did combine that one weapon. This weapon is excellent. And as long as you build your ship with that synergy in mind, it just performs very, very well. The quad cannon surprised me. It did almost exactly the same at 30K, which is just excellent. It's such a cool weapon too. The visuals on it look really, really good. And then we have our prolonged, and it did very well. I find on like my real high-end cannon meta builds, I run, you know, all three of these, and I find that these two go back and forth. Sometimes one's higher than the other. So I would say, even though this did 6K less, these are pretty comparable weapons. And then lastly, our dual heavy that we have, that is the linked. Again, you can switch that out for the crafted, be just fine, or any other variant. Did 22, which isn't bad. This is where I was surprised with recursive shearing on a cannon scatter volley. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is recursive shearing is also affected by your teammates. So that's really kind of a hard thing, I think, to gauge. Like I said, when I was running mostly yesterday, the beam overload testing, I was just getting stuck with just teams that were terrible. And I'm not talking about like their builds were bad. I don't know what their builds were. Their decision making and running the TFOs were terrible. So they were long and there was trash everywhere, and it just, you know, everybody wasn't together, and that's going to have a big effect on recursive shearing, because, you know, everybody that's hitting a target that has recursive shearing is building up in that ability that is credited to you. So on, you know, further review by myself, I don't know that this is so much higher because of scatter volley, but just because of a better run. The run I did before this with a slightly different configuration on the cannon scatter volley also did pretty well. Not 20, I think it was mid-teens, but I was only getting, I think the max I got was 12 out of the beam overload, which again is kind of counterintuitive. So, but I think that's why. I think that just was kind of roll of the dice with the overall team that I had. And then it goes down into all the different turrets, and you can see these stats here. Pets, which are the Nimbus Raiders that I call on our pirates. Chemosite, you know, didn't do real great on that. I didn't expect it. It's more of a fill-in kind of trait. But you can see the heavy hitters and what really matters up front here and boosting those things. So I'm happy with the run, especially for a free ship they just gave us. I think that this is a decent build to start with. You can tweak it. I mean, really, you can take this build and you can really put together kind of any kind of phaser build that you want to on it, with really not changing too much, unless you don't have some of the gear. So also lastly, this shield that I'm running here, and it has a lot more different effects on a lot of other ships. This one, it's kind of plain. This shield is from the Boys and Girls Club charity bundle that you can get for $1. That is still live. For $1, you get that, and you get a Ryzian pet and a title, but you get this vanity shield. On other ships that have more accents, you get a lot more of this kind of crystallized looking stuff. This ship doesn't do a lot to really kind of highlight it, but I thought I'd put it on just to kind of show it off, since last week's video where I went over this ship being free also discussed that charity for the Boys and Girls Club. I'll put a link down in the description for that as well. For the $1 donation, you get the shield, Ryzian pet, and a title. And for $8 and some change, depending on where you live, you get 2 tier 6 ships, 30 low-buy crystals, and I want to say there was one other thing that I just cannot recall at the moment, but I'll put a link down in the description if you haven't checked that out. If you don't have those ships for $8, I mean, you can't beat it, right? I mean, they're $30 ships, so definitely check that out, and it goes to a good cause. So I think that finishes up the video for today for the Paladin. Again, just another reminder and shout out to CasualSAB. Go check him out. Links will be down in the description. Great guy, excellent content. And again, he'll appreciate it. I will as too if you go over and give him some love there. All right, guys, until next time, thank you for watching. I really appreciate you guys, and stay safe, and we'll see you next time.